Welcome to IVF This, episode 58, Acceptance. It isn't what you think it is. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing so well. We're already into 2022, and that is really hard for my brain to understand. Like, it's kind of rejecting that another year has gone by, but alas, that is why acceptance is a beautiful topic for today. Acceptance is probably one of the most challenging things for people to embrace, and I'm including myself in that. Believe me, I still work on this daily. And most people tend to think of acceptance as either being super happy or content with how something is happening, how something has happened. Maybe you think of acceptance as having to be a doormat to life or to other people. And these are just a few examples that I'm sharing. But what's important to know is that for most of us, the very reason to resist acceptance comes down to some variation of those two things. Either we have to be super happy about it, or we're basically a doormat. I think most of us intellectually know that acceptance and peace are very aspirational things. I think most of us really want to experience acceptance and peace. They sound so lovely, right? Just the visual image alone when I think of peace is very calming. So if most of us want it, why is it so damn hard? Well, it's because when we have to accept something, or when we take steps to accept something, we in turn give up the fantasy of how we thought that things should play out. Literally whatever it is, a relationship, a job, and for my beautiful listeners, how the journey to our family would look. Now, let's be totally fair. Many of these fantasies we did not put in our own heads. Some maybe we did, and we can own that, but specifically around family planning, there are very deeply cultural and social expectations that are just nailed into us from a very early age. The messaging that we receive pretty much starts at birth for many of us. We are indoctrinated that when you are born a woman within the cis heteronormative culture, we are expected to get married and make babies. This may show up differently in your life. Some of us know we want babies from the earliest we can remember. And some of us kind of get to a point where we think, okay, I think it's probably time. If we're going to do this, let's do this. And it doesn't matter when or how you get to that decision. It doesn't matter at all. When we make that decision and then we struggle, it is incredibly painful. But all of this plays into acceptance. In order to accept this journey, we have to look at all of this, the cultural messaging, expectations, the fantasy that exists in our minds. Our brains love fantasy. It's exhilarating, it's intoxicating, and it's incredibly distracting. So our brains really love the flight of fantasy. It's completely normal. And our egos hold on to things very, very tightly. So you have the conflict of reality, and then the brain clinging to this fantasy. You can kind of see why it's so damn hard to give it up. The problem is that most of us don't realize it's a fantasy. Most of us think that this is just how it is, or this is just how it's supposed to go. That is the way it is in a lot of our minds. Or it's how everyone else has done it and how it seems easy for everybody else, right? That's still a fantasy. We have no idea how easy it is for other people. We don't think about these things as fantasies, more like inevitabilities. Inevitabilities that for us seem to be withheld, which makes it incredibly unfair. But they are fantasies. For me, it was kind of a fantasy to think that we would get pregnant easily, We would have had a large family that we had always talked about. Now, at that time, particularly when we first started out, 9, 10 years ago, I didn't know or realize that it was a fantasy. I didn't know I was going to have my left ovary removed eventually. I didn't know that my husband's sperm motility was akin to those little guys just standing around looking at each other. I didn't know that. So all that to say is you're not doing something or anything wrong by having or continuing to have a fantasy. It's not a problem. The problem is when the fantasy and the reality bump up against each other and you're holding on so tightly to this fantasy that you're miserable because the fantasy doesn't align with reality. We're spending so much time resisting what's happening, saying to ourselves and to the world, nope, that's not how this is supposed to be happening. And you just feel like crap all of the time. Fantasies aren't a bad thing, my friend, not at all. When we use them against ourselves and against what was really happening for us, that's when the fantasy no longer serves us. So let's talk about acceptance. Acceptance is like the opposite or the absence of resistance. There can be acceptance around people and circumstances. I think about resistance like resistance is to push or show opposition to something. And we often do this with our feelings like grief, anxiety, fear, sadness. Sometimes we can even feel them building in our bodies and then we start fighting back. This isn't happening. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to go through this. And we try to distract ourselves in an effort to resist the emotion. Again, everyone, well, I can't confidently say everyone, but everyone does this most of the time. But I often think about resisting emotions like when you're standing in the ocean, right? You're waist deep in water and you'll tell yourself, when this wave comes, I'm just going to keep my feet planted and I'm going to stand still. I'm going to resist the wave. Guys, I'll be honest. I am 5'4" on a tall day, but that's also just what says on my driver's license. In Texas, they don't actually measure you. They just ask you. So if you pulled out a tape measure, I'm probably closer to 5'2". But if a wave is coming at me and I'm in waist deep water, there is only so much resistance that my body can offer before my ass is tumbling around in the surf. And it's the same with emotions. You can try your damnedest to resist those emotions, but they are going to slip through. And then the moment that your guard is down, they will all come up to the surface. So resistance is always pushing back from the external, trying to resist whatever is happening, trying to control an uncontrollable. And what I found with myself, my clients, is that it just doesn't work. Just like trying to stay standing in a large wave, there are so many things that we come up against in this world that we cannot control and we cannot change. So when we put all of our effort and energy into trying to control something that we have absolutely no control over, then we're using our precious energy, our precious time, our precious emotions, our precious brain in pursuit of something that has zero payoff. There are so many things that we cannot control. And let's be honest, there are terrible, terrible things that happen. Many terrible things have happened to us in this community. And when those terrible things happen, we can't really do anything about it. There is pain, there is suffering, there is heartache, and really hard things in this world. And this suffering is the part that, for me personally and for my clients, that I am trying to accept and to help them accept. To accept those things outside of you that you cannot change, the situation you're in, the diagnosis that you have, right? There are things that we can do. We can take positive efforts and positive steps to help with it, but there are certain things that we cannot change. So we understand that, we accept that, and then we decide who we want to be and how we want to show up in our lives. Walking into the fertility clinic, if this is where you are, this is the decision that you've made. So who do you want to be walking in there? When you accept and embrace what is happening, notice I did not say like or enjoy. Let's be honest. There were no rainbows and daisies shooting out of my ass while I was walking to Fora Fertility in Austin. That's my clinic with the amazing doctors Skillern and Crawford. I was not like screaming from the top of a mountain, yes, I get to do IVF. This is what my dreams are made of. I have $65,000 worth of children. I could have paid off almost all of my student loan debt with that money, people. I am not overjoyed that IVF was our path. Now, it's the path that has gotten us our family. I'm grateful to IVF and to the science and the medical professionals who's made it possible. Do I wish that we didn't have to spend that money, that anxiety, that heartache? Hell yes. It's one thing to say, I wish that things could have been different with the understanding that it is not, than saying it should have been different. I know it's subtle, but that tiny shift is really, really powerful. It should be different implies that I had no control, but I had control the whole way. I always have control over how I think, feel, and what I choose to do. And that is true for each and every one of you. So when you can embrace and accept that the things that are happening to you and around you, then you can turn the focus inward instead of draining all of your energy on trying to control the uncontrollables. So firstly, when we talk about acceptance, embracing the pain and suffering as a normal and expected part of life is always going to be the first step. There is no human ever in existence that has not experienced pain and suffering. Once you have embraced it, once you have accepted that, then you can ask yourself, now what? So when I find myself in resistance to what is happening around me, whatever's going on, whatever I'm experiencing, when I am fighting and arguing with reality, I like to ask myself questions. I find these questions really help to get me to a place of acceptance. Maybe not right away, mind you. There are times that it can be like a light switch, right? Just flips on and off, but not always. And that's something that's really important to remember. Thought work is not like a microwave. You will not experience deep, meaningful, lasting changes in 30 to 60 seconds. Sometimes it's instant, right? Sometimes you can get asked the right question or have the right thought and it just all clicks and makes sense. And then sometimes it takes intentional work to go back and ask yourself more questions, to reconsider things that you've never considered before, to be aware that you're arguing with reality. And that's okay. Let it be okay if it doesn't happen instantly. When we're all learning to walk, we fall on our asses hundreds, thousands of times. And we, as babies, never make that a problem. We just stand up and do it over and over again. So one of the first things I do when I'm coming up against a situation that I cannot control, something that I'm trying to control or something I'm resisting, I ask myself, what if I just said yes to all this? I'm going to tell you a story. I vividly remember after we found out our transfer failed. So this was well over a year ago, but it's still so visceral, so clearly in my memory. I woke up around 3 a.m. This was the next morning. So we found out around 2-ish p.m. on a Friday. And so this is about 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. And I kind of woke up already crying. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. It's like your body knew you needed to cry before you even awake and conscious. So I went out to the living room and I laid on our couch and I started talking to that precious little M baby asking, why did you leave me? And after an hour or so, I could feel myself resisting the emotions. I could feel myself trying to distract myself. I could feel myself not wanting to cry anymore. And I just asked myself very quietly, like I was listening to this little tiny voice in my heart, what if I just said yes to the pain? And in that moment, I felt this peace. It's kind of hard to articulate it because it wasn't as if I was done grieving, but I wasn't fighting the grief. Now, mind you, because I'm the type of person who has never learned a lesson unless it was the hard way, I would go through this process dozens of times over the next several months. But that's the first place you start. What if I just said yes to all of this? Whatever it is, anger, sadness, shame, disappointment, longing, loneliness, it is a feeling. It cannot hurt me. So that's step one. We say yes. We say yes to what is happening around us and to us. And sometimes just embracing that understanding that you are not going to be happy all of the time, and that there is a multitude of emotions that you are going to experience can be enough to drop your resistance. It can. But if not, we go on to step 2, which is to question everything that's going on in our brain. The internal mental gymnastics that we put ourselves through. It's the drunk asshole in our brain that's just talking nonsense. It's the unconscious belief systems that tell us we are broken, that we will never be happy, that everything is hopeless. All of that is optional. But in order for us to understand that it's optional, we got to question it. And sometimes you'll find that even questioning your internal beliefs, you can still decide that you don't want to change them. And that's perfectly fine. There are feelings that some of us want to hold on to, even if they're painful. But the point is that you get to decide. It's not just happening to you. It's a conscious decision. Now, before I get to step 2 and the questions, I want to offer that you don't need to be in a hurry to answer them. I find that a lot of us ask ourselves questions and feel like we have to offer an answer to ourselves. But the best way I can describe it is by asking these types of questions that I'm going to share with you. You're just kind of stirring the pot in your brain, not like the office gossip stirring the pot, but giving yourself things to consider that you might never have considered before. So some of the questions that I ask myself about my thoughts are, maybe I'm wrong about that. What if this isn't true at all? What if I didn't care about this particular thing? What if none of this was a problem? What if that thought wasn't even an option? What if this is exactly how it's supposed to be? What if it was always supposed to happen this way? What if I'm doing this thing perfectly right now? What if I'm already enough? So any question that you use to challenge your thinking is incredibly valuable, but those are just some of my go-tos. So let's recap. When you're feeling resistance, when you are arguing with what is happening, when you're telling yourself it should be different or it shouldn't be different, step 1 is to say yes to whatever is happening. Open yourself up to those feelings, to the reality of what is happening, even if it is painful. And then step 2 is to question everything that you're thinking. I promise you, what you've always thought about acceptance is not the sunshine and roses we think it is. It is an intentional practice that will bring you peace. And peace is such a beautiful emotion, and that is what I want for each and every one of you. Okay, that is what I have for you today. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.